Good morning. Hope all of you are doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Beitzah, Daf Dalet, a very well-known Mishnah and beginning a new parak. This is parak Ein Tzadin, and we'll speak about the malacha of tzad. Tzad is the malacha of trapping. Of course, you can't kill something that you haven't trapped yet, and in order to have food for Yom Tov, you have to make sure that you've trapped it. Now we know that there are malachos that are permitted on Yom Tov, which are referred to as the malacha sochel nefesh. However, trapping is not one of them, as we'll soon see in Rashi and based off of the Mishnah here. We're starting at the bottom of Daf Yomi, Beitzah, the new parak, and the Mishnah opens, and so does the parak. Ein tzadin dagim and abebarim b'yom tov. A bebar is a small type of container. In this case, the container, of course, is liquid-based because it's holding fish. No, you are not allowed to catch fish, even from a small container b'yom tov. Nor can you feed them. Aval, in contrast with fish, one is allowed, tzadin, it is permissible to capture, not in a halachic way, but it's permissible to grab a chayav v'of min habebarim. You're allowed to take a smaller animal, like a deer, as we'll soon see in the Gemara, v'of, like a chicken. Those are allowed. V'nostin lifnehim bizonos. We'll see why the Gemara makes a distinction between these two things, though the obvious, quick distinction is that catching a fish is quite difficult. And catching a deer when it's in a small container is not that difficult. Just grab it because it's standing right there. The room is not big. So then, and also as well, v'nosin lifneim mizonos. 2 lines from the bottom, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, lo kol habebarim shaveh. He is making sure that we know that not every bebar, not every smaller room or smaller container is the same. Zeh haklal. Here's the general rule as we turn to the top of Chav Zal Amud Aleph. Kol mechusar tzeda aser. If an animal is in a room and the animal is mechusar tzeda, namely, the animal is not yet trapped. So if that's the case, then aser, v'she'ena mechusar tzeda mutter. And if it's something that is not lacking trapping, in other words, it's properly trapped, then you can just grab it, no problem. We'll define that in the Gemara with a parameter of what it means it's easy to grasp something. But the Gemara first picks up on a challenge. The challenge is that the second line of our Mishnah spoke about chayav v'of, and we said that we're allowed to grab a chayav v'of, no problem at all. But the Gemara says we have a Tanaic source that doesn't agree with this. Chav Daled Amud Aleph, or a minhu, the Gemara opens as follows. There's a Beitzah, and the Beitzah writes, Be'baran shel chaya v'shel ofos. Our Mishnah said tzadin. What does it say here? Ein tzadin mehem b'yom tov, ve'ein nosin znem mazonos. So a direct conflict between two Tanaic sources, our Mishnah and this Beitzah. How do we get out of this mess? And says the Gemara, it's a double question. It's really kasha chaya achaya and kasha ofos ha'ofos. It's a double question. We have to separate out the animals of chaya v'of. And we'll see why momentarily. And the reason why is because the Gemara thinks that we can solve half of our problem. The fact that we have a contradiction in our Mishnah with a chaya, a small animal, we'll refer to this animal as a deer. The fact that it's okay in our Mishnah to capture a deer, and it's not okay in this Beitzah to capture a deer, lo kasha. That's not a contradiction. I can solve that problem because Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbanan. Because Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan have a machlokas in regards to a chaya. It's not. The Mishnah writes, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Hatzad Sipor lemigdal utzvila bayis. If you capture a bird in a tower, not our case yet, utzvila bayis, and you capture a deer in a house, chayev. Namely, when you close the door on the deer that has walked into your house, you have violated now the iser of tzad. You're not allowed to do that. That's what this Beitzah here is talking about at the top of the page. Ein tzadin mehen b'yom tov, that you cannot capture a chaya. You're not allowed to put the deer into your house. Lebayis hu d'mechayev aval. What's the implication? Lebebarin lo. But in a smaller room than your house, in a room in your house, or in a bebar in a small pen, no problem. That aligns with our Mishnah, which says tzadin bebarin. That's okay. So the first shita, that of Rabbi Yehuda, that aligns with our Mishnah. V'chachamim omrim, tzipor lemigdal utzvi. We're missing a word here. Utzvi labayis, lagina v'lachatzer v'la bebar. And he holds that all of them are going to be in violation of the isser of tzad, and therefore we've cleanly answered that aspect of the machlokas between our Mishnah and this Beitzah. We said in our Mishnah that the chaya is allowed to be trapped, and in the Beitzah we said it cannot be trapped. And the Gemara has a clear line of distinction between Rabbi Yehuda, who aligns with our Mishnah, and the Chachamim, who align with the Beitzah. All is well in that regard. The problem is that there's a second aspect of this contradiction. The first was chaya, which we solved, and the second is ofos, which we did not solve. Ela ofos ha'ofos kasha. And that still remains to be a problem. So about 10 lines down, the Gemara says, V'chitema. And if you want to say, Hanami lo kasha, there isn't even a machlokas between these two sources. between our Mishnah and this Beitzah as it relates to the Ophos, maybe we could argue Habe Bebar Mekura. In one case, we're talking about a small pan or a container that's roofed, and Habe Bebar She'ena Mekura, and one is not that way. Says the Gemara, we cannot do that. We can't make that assertion. Why not? Because if we were to look carefully in the machlokas that we saw between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim in the Mishnah that was brought to solve our problem about Chaya Achaya, we'll see that that doesn't work. Bayis de kebebar mekuradami. A house is similar to a small pen, a small container room that is mekura, that has a roof. Ubein le Rabbi Yehuda, ubein le Rabbanan, sipur, when it came to a bird, which is an oaf, it's a chicken, it's fowl, le migdal in le baisla. So therefore, we have the same problem even with this answer, because the Mishnah with Rabbi Yehuda, and not our Mishnah, but the Mishnah quoted in the Gemara with Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan, they agree in regards to a bird that lemigdal in and lebayislo, that and only under certain circumstances is it going to be considered sud. So therefore that answer doesn't work. And therefore the Gemara pivots and gives a different answer. We're about a quarter of the way down Chavdal Amadal from a Rabba Bar Huna. Hacha, what are we dealing with over here in this case when we speak about the fact that a bird is not allowed to be trapped? That's betzipor diror askinan. We're dealing with a bird that is particularly free. It's a bird, she'ena mekabelis marus. It doesn't accept upon itself a master. Recently I was in Mexico, and there was a space where there were a lot of birds. So they have this guy who carries an eagle on his arm. He wears a thick leather glove, and the eagle constantly comes back with food, whatever the motivators are, constantly comes back to this person's arm. That bird is mekabel marus. He knows who his master is, and he listens. The bird that we're discussing, and the bird that this Beitzah on the top of Chavdal and Malal doesn't allow for trapping, that bird is eina mekabelis marus, and that's why you can't, even no matter where it is, you can never pick it up. It's always going to find an escape route. The Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, lama nikra shma tzipor deror. Why is this bird called a tzipor deror, a bird of freedom? Shedara babayis kibesade. It lives in a house like it does in the field, namely, it does whatever it wants, wherever it wants, and gets wherever it needs to be. So therefore, our Mishnah doesn't allow it. Well, so then our Mishnah raises a concern. If you've made a distinction between this Beitzah at the top of the page and Chav Gimel Amud Beis, the Mishnah, if you raised a distinction in regards to the cases, one of them is a bird that is trappable and the other is not. So says the Gemara, Hashta to Asis Lahachi. Now that we've come to this, now that we've come to an answer that doesn't require a distinction of the Rabbanan versus Rabbi Yehuda. We don't like doing that. We don't like parsing out like that. We do, and we don't have a choice. We'd rather understand the cases as halachically distinct, not just in its authorship. But we could have also argued chaya achaya nami lo kasha. We could have come up with another distinction in cases. Bar katan, bar gadol. We could have said that maybe when it's a bebar katan, so that is going to be our Mishnah where you're allowed to trap. It's such a small pen. The animal has nowhere to walk. You know, like when they're making animals that are veal. They want them to get super fat, so they put them in a pen. It's a shaila and halach of tsar bali chaim. Are you allowed to benefit from eating those animals even? There are shailas in poskim about eating veal, because basically they're force-fed. They're also force-fed basar b'chalav under certain circumstances, which is its own set of guidelines. Anyways, but the Gemara says here, this is a very small pen. So we could have made the distinction, Habibay bar katan, Habibay bar gadol, and the whole problem would have gone away. Forget about the machlokas, Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. We don't have to answer the contradiction between the Mishnah and the Beitzah by saying it's person X versus person Y. Just say our Mishnah is talking about a very small baybar, and the Beitzah is talking about a larger baybar. And heichidami baybar katan, heichidami baybar gadol. How would we have defined those locations? Says the Gemara with a few different answers. Whenever you run after it, if you're able to grab the animal in one swing of the arm, then that's a bebar katan. So that's why fishing in a small pond is a problem. I don't care how good you are. I mean, unless it's mamish like a fishbowl and you have a net, that's not tzad. But if you have like a pond in your backyard with a bunch of goldfish in there, it's not a guarantee that every time you scoop up the net, you're going to get a fish. So that's the difference between bebar katan and bebar gadol. A bebar katan, you can grab the animal. V'idach, any other option, that's a bebar gadol. Inami, another distinction between a small bebar and a large one. Inami called hecha deika upse bebar gadol. Wherever there are corners where the animals can escape to, that's considered a bebar gadol. And we're defining them in the opposite ways. First, we defined a Bebar Katan by saying I can reach everything. And now we're defining as a second answer a Bebar Gadol by saying there are corners where the animals can hide. V'idach, as long as there aren't corners, that's considered a Bebar Katan. And then for 3-4 lines before the wide lines, Inami, another option in defining Bebar Katan versus Bebar Gadol, Bebar Katan, as long as the shadows from one wall fall on another, it's considered Katan. V'idach Bebar Gadol. Different answers. But the point of the Gemara here, overarchingly, is that we don't even accept our initial answer. We started our answer by saying, hey, we need to distinguish here. Our Mishnah is talking about Rabbi Yehuda, and the Beitzah on the top of Chavdal is talking about the Rabbanan. No, we don't need to do that. Bebar Gadol versus Bebar Katan. And then we don't have to make any distinctions between the Chaya and the Oaf. All is well. And that brings us to the 2 dots halfway down, right before the wide lines on Chavdal Amud Aleph. Let's continue. Rashbag Omer lo kalai habe and shav. And he taught us something that seemed rather intuitive. And on that rather intuitive line, we have a very strange comment. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, an excellent chain of history. Rav Yosef, 3rd century, Rav Yehuda, 2nd century, Shmuel, 1st century of the Amoraim. And he says the halacha is Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. The halacha in our Mishnah is like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. So Abaye says back to him, Abaye says to Rav Yosef, Abaye was a Talmud of Rav Yosef. So Abaye was 4th century. So we're seeing a 4th century dialogue here. Amar le Abaye, halacha. When you say that the halacha is like person X, that's michlal de pligi. That implies that there's someone who says, Kol be'baran shavin. What did Rav Shimon ben Gamliel omer? What did he say? He said, Lo kol be'baran shavin. He said, they're not all the same. There's bigger and smaller. So if you say that the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, so that implies that somebody out there holds that kol be'baran shavin, that all of them are the same. So how could you say that? Amar le, I mean, you're right, but it might not mean Allah. Who cares? So I said we follow like Rashbag. What's the big deal? So it says the Gemara, because this isn't a game. Amar le, Gemara is imorta tehei. The Gemara, which is our tradition, you're turning it into a song. This isn't poetry. We're trying to figure out halacha l'maisa. If you tell me the halacha is like X, you're going to evoke from me the response of, hey, who's the other shita? There is no other shita. It's just Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. So be clear when you speak. Don't just randomly spew things and tell me that the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Nobody argues with Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. So the Gemara ends there with a bit of a sharp line. We've seen this line before, that the Gemara is not a song, but rather it's our tradition, and therefore we should take it seriously. Let's continue. 2 lines into the wide lines. We had was considered as Rebbe. Abaye was a Talmud of Rebbe. Athu de Amris. That's all the times when he was blind. Yeah, why are you asking? It's quite a sharp retort. It is quite a sharp retort. But Abaye and Rava were
This is one thing.
Yeah. Could have been Talmud Chaver, that I don't know, but the generations were certainly different.
Right.
But,
What's the translation of that line?
Gemara. We're learning our traditions. Zemorta Tehei. You're going to turn it into a song. That's how some people explain it. But it's used as a catchphrase. Rashi also discusses this a little bit. If you wanted to look into it, Rashi discusses this a little bit as well. It's kind of like it's a colloquialism of the day, kind of a thing. It's not good. It's not a compliment. Let's put it that way. The Gemara continues. We had said, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel had said that the rule was that any animal that's mechusar tzeda, any animal with it, when you enclose it, it still isn't trapped, then it's still eligible for the isser of tzad. How do we define a space in which it is mechusar tzeda? Well, Amar Rav Yosef, it depends on how you talk. Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, same Amoraim, same conversations. Kol she'omer havei mitzuda unetzudenu. Let's go trap this animal. That's enough. So it's kind of like you're megala, so you're revealing what your thoughts are about that animal when you open your mouth. Oh, we got to go trap a bear, right? Okay, so you're talking in language of tzad. So if you want to go get a chicken, all right, we got to go trap a deer. So then that's a problem. Amar le Abai, hold on 1 second. Ducks and tarnagolim she'omrim havei mitzuda unsudenu. People do use that language when we talk about ducks. However, v'tanya hatzad avazim and tarnagolim v'yone hardisaos putter. These animals, all of them that you trap them, you're putter, which implies that they're already trapped. Which means that the language of, hey, let's go trap this animal is not a gilui milsa, that you're actually trapping anything. So Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna, Amar Shmuel, you're right. Halalu bain lekluvan la'erev, v'halalu ein bain lekluvan la'erev, excuse me. So what we're doing is we're adding another factor. Yes, number one is we say that we have to trap this animal. And number two is it has to be an animal that doesn't come home to nest at night. Okay, that's how we know that animal is a trappable animal. But if the animal does come home at night, so then we know exactly where he is at 3 a.m. Hopefully, right? Then we know where the animal is. The Gemara still can't handle this. The Gemara says, where am I? Oh, there you are. Thank you. V'harei yone shovach. You have certain types of doves. V'yone aliyah, doves that are in the chicken coop, doves that are in the attic. Deboin lekluvan la'erev. They do come home at night. V'tanya, we see that they do come home at night. We had just said that factor means that they're trapped. Yet what do we see? V'tanya outside yone shovach v'yone aliyah. That if they do come home to rest at night, that they're chai. But you just said that the combo deal was, hey, we have to go trap this animal, and it doesn't come home at night, implying that if it does come home at night, that animal is already trapped. Yet we see here that that's not true. So the factor that you introduced is not correct. So then the distinction is food. The distinction is, does this animal rely upon you for food? If they rely upon you for food, all right, so then you know where they're going to be because they're always going to come to the trough. Everybody knows that the animal is going to come to eat. You put out a bale of hay and there's cows around, they're going to come in due time, they'll be there. That's not sud. You know exactly where the animal is going to be. So now here's the trifecta in order to establish what is considered mechusar tzeda. Number one, it's an animal where we verbally or whatever conceptually have to say, hey, we got to go trap this animal. Number two, I should say it's actually two factors. And even if it comes home to roost and comes to sleep at home, but it's ein mezonos alecha, then we know that animal is considered mechusar tzeda. A little difficult. Then says the Gemara, Rav Mari, Amar Hani Avidi Ribuye. What are you talking about? These things, they all run away. How can you say that? Birds fly everywhere. Hani lo Avidi Ribuye. We can just say there's just different kinds of animals. Says the Gemara, but all animals fly away. Kulu nami Avidi Ribuye. You can't make a distinction on that. All birds fly away. I mean, chickens don't, but other birds do. Says the Gemara, Lekluvan Ka'amrina Davidi Ribuye. The answer he was giving is that if they were to fly away when you walk up to their nest, then that would also change the parameters of Mechusar Tzeda. That brings us to a new Mishnah at the bottom of Chaf Daled Amud Aleph. Let's continue. The nets, the traps for a chayav of v'dagim she'asan me'erev Yom Tov. If you made the traps beforehand, lo yito mehen b'Yom Tov, you should not take animals out of that trap. If you wake up on Yom Tov morning and you see an animal there, you should not take it. Ela im ken yodea shenitzodo me'erev Yom Tov. You should not do that unless you know for sure that it was there from before Yom Tov. And if you don't know, if it's safek muchan, if we're not sure what the status is, if this is muksa or not, then you should not take it. And then says the Gemara a story which doesn't seem to really flow, and the Gemara is going to be bothered by that. There's a story of a non-Jew, shehevi dagim, that he brought fish to Rabban Gamliel, the Amar, and Rabban Gamliel paskin on them mutarin hein. We don't know what mutarin means. Can you eat them? Are they just not muksa? We'll see in the Gemara. Ela she'ein ritzoni lekabel hein, and Rashi says they were enemies. Maybe he was trying to appease him with a gift. But the point is that Rabban Gamliel didn't get along with this guy. So he brought him food, and he says that it's all good, it's mutter. So then the Gemara says, Maisa listor. The story doesn't match the beginning of the Mishnah. The beginning of the Mishnah was saying, we're not sure what the halachic status is of the food. Was it trapped before Yantif or was it trapped on Yantif? And we don't know which one it is. And then this guy gives him food. We don't know what it is. And Rabban Gamliel says it's mutter. Chasurei Mechzer answers the Gemara b'Hachik Tani, 5 lines from the bottom, Chaf Daled Amud Aleph. Really, we need to put the Beitzah back together in a proper way. Really, the Mishnah should have said as follows: Safek Muchan Aser. The Tanna Kama was of the opinion that when you have a status of Safek Muchan, we're not sure when the animal was trapped. It might have been before Yantif started, and it might have been after. Tanna Kama says it's Aser. And then Rabban Gamliel Matir, he says, it's okay. Safek Muchan is fine by me. I allow you to use that animal. And then the story makes sense. So that's what the Gemara does in its retransformation of our Mishnah to indicate that there is 2 shitas in our Mishnah, one that we haven't seen yet, which is that Safek Muchan, if we're not sure when the animal was trapped, we treat it as though it's not. And then Rabban Gamliel is the lenient one who says that if there's a Safek Muchan, we're not sure when the animal was trapped, where it's okay to eat it. And the story supports Rabban Gamliel's shita. How do we paskin? Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mar Shmuel, the halacha is ein halacha k'Rabban Gamliel. In other words, we do not say that Safek Muchan is mutter. When we're unsure if something, this is a very important halacha in general. Let's say we're not sure if something is muchan. We don't know if its halachic status was acceptable before Shabbos. We don't know if it was muktzah or not. We don't paskin like Rabban Gamliel. And what that means is that we hold that safek muchan is aser, like the Tanna Kama. So then says the Gemara, this line of Rabbi Yehuda Mar Shmuel where he says ein halacha k'Rabban Gamliel, it has showed its face in a couple of other places, and maybe it wasn't here. 2 lines from the bottom. Some say that the line of Rabbi Yehuda Mar Shmuel was actually on another brisa. The Tanya, the brisa writes, Safek Muchan, Rabban Gamliel Matir, Rabbi Yoshua Oser. This is a different brisa, different than our re-explanation of our Mishnah, because here we're including the name of Rabbi Yoshua, which didn't exist before. But that the brisa is similar in its shitas, which is that Rabban Gamliel is a Matir. And there, on that brisa, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Bar Shmuel Halachak Rabbi Yoshua, there he said, we don't paskin like Rabban Gamliel. Some say that the line of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Shmuel, where he says that the halacha is not like Rabban Gamliel, was on a different brisa. This is a little bit longer, and we have to do a little more work to figure this out. To Tanya, the Beitzah writes, as we turn to the top of Chaf Daled Amud Beis, Shochten min ha nagarin b'yom tov. You're allowed to do shchita from animals that are in a very small space. Avalo min ha rishtos u'min ha michmaros. You're not allowed to capture animals that are stuck in nets. That's the Tanakama. We're not going to focus on his shita. We're going to focus on the next shita. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer. Reb Shimon ben Elazar says two things, and we'll see that the implications of these two things, they conflict with one another. Here's the first of his two things. You see that the trap is already closed on an animal before Yom Tov. Then biyadua she me'erev Yom Tov nitzod mutarin. If you see that the trap door is closed, even if you can't see the animal, it's under brush, but you see the trap door is closed 5 minutes before Shkia, that animal is mucha. That animal is then eligible to be used, no problem. But if you find that the trap is only closed for the first time on Yom Tov, that's the first time you saw it, we still don't know when it was trapped, then biyadua should be Yom Tov nitzodu v'asurin, and we assume that it's trapped on Shabbos. So says the Gemara, within the sheet of Reb Shimon ben Elazar, there's a contradiction. Hakufa kashya. What's the contradiction within his shita? Amris, first Reb Shimon ben Elazar said as follows. You said, that if you found that the trap door was closed from Erev Yom Tov, biyadua shemei Erev Yom Tov nitzodu. We said that that's the reason that it's mutter. Taima. The reason why you're allowed to eat that food is the bo mitzan mikol kalan. We saw that the trap was already tripped. Hasfeka asurin, but that implies that had there been an element of safek, then that would be asur. But the seifa, ema seifa, implies something different. What did Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar say in the seifa? Bo mitzan mikol kalan b'yom tov. That if a person were to have seen the trap closed on Yom Tov, biyadua should be Yom Tov nitzoda. You'd know that it was trapped on Yativ proper. Taima. The reason why we're saying that we assume that is because the bo mitzan mikol kalan is because we see that the trap was triggered on Yom Tov. Hasveka, that implies hasveka me'erev Yom Tov nitzoda mutar, that had it been that it was from before, at least a suffix of whether or not it was before, that it should be mutter. So the two parts of Reb Shimon ben Elazar contradict one another in their implications. How do we answer that? Says the Gemara, you're right that it implies that way, but you're kind of reading it the wrong way. The Gemara says 1/3 of the way down, Hachai Kamar, this is the proper way to understand the sheet of Reb Shimon ben Elazar. It says, if you see that the trap already caught the animal from before Yom Tov, then you know that the animal was there from before Yom Tov, and it's muchan, no problem at all. But had it been that there was any element of safek, then we treat it as though it was for sure trapped on Yom Tov, which means that it's definitely going to be muksa. And then, on that note, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel halacha Reb Shimon ben Elazar. That was the comment of Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, that we paskin like Reb Shimon ben Elazar, that the suffix is going to be problematic, and that is thematic throughout. That brings us to the two dots halfway to the bottom of the page, and the line in the middle of the page there says on Chaf Daled Amud Beis of Amar Mutarim Hain. That was from the story in our Mishnah of Rabban Gamliel that a Nachri brought him some fish, and he said that it's mutter. Rabban Gamliel said the fish is mutter. So what does mutter mean in this case? Says the Gemara, Mutarim Lamai. What are these fish that were given as a gift mutter for? You got them on Yontif. What are they mutter for? Says the Gemara, Rav Amar Mutarim Lekabel. You can receive them. In other words, they're not muksa. You can move them. There's no problem of metaltalin. All is fine. The Levi Amar Mutarim Ba'achila. And Levi says, no, it means that not only is it mutter to move, but it's also mutter to eat. Amar Rav. Rav says, and we'll see that this is all directly connected. Rav and Levi were counterparts. They were part of the Dor HaMa'avar, the transitioning generation from the Tanaim to the Amoraim, and that's why Rav and Levi, each of them played a role in that transference. Levi, for example, was a partial author of the Toseftas. Levi's an Amora. He did what Rebbe did, but for the Tosefta, so he was very unique. Rav was as well. We know about Rav, that Rav Tanahu Upali, we see that as well. So the two of them very early on in the Amoraim. Omar Rav. Rav says, Le'olam al yimane adam atzmo mi beis hamedrash afilu sha'achas. This is everyone here this morning. You got to be hitting the base medrash regularly. How do I know? Says Rav, because the Ana Levi Havinan Kame de Rebbe Ki Amra Lahashmaisa. Because both Rav says Levi and I were both in front of Rebbe when he was talking about this sugya. Be'urta at night Amar Mutarim Be'achila. At night, like Levi had quoted, but incorrectly, at night, he said it was mutarim be'achila, that one was even allowed to eat the gift that Rabban Gamliel had received. B'tzafra, but in the morning, amar mutarim lekabel. And in the morning, by the time he finished teaching the sugya, so Rebbe, by the time he finished teaching the sugya, he said, I know I started with mutarim, but really the halacha is that it's just lekabel, that you're only allowed to move it. So that's why the Gemara says, Ana, Rav says about himself, Ana dehavoy be medrasha, I who was in the base medrash for both parts of his shiurim. So hadribi, I knew what Rebbe's retraction meant, and I knew what was going on in the flow of the sugya. But if you leave in the middle for a whole day and you try to pick up the sugya, you're not going to know what's going on. Levi de lo hava be medrasha. But in regards to Levi, who was not in the base medrash for part of the shiur, lo hadarbe, he didn't know to retract. So Levi thought that when Rabban Gamliel said that the fish that he received from the Nachri was mutter, Levi misunderstood and thought that it was edible, halachically edible. That's not true. It's like Beitzah shenol d'biyamtov. It's not. It's no blood. You're not allowed to eat it. Masha ein kain, Rav understood properly. The Beitzah asks, Meisve, we're going to be finishing 4 or 5 lines before the end of the page. Meisve, the Gemara asks from a Beitzah, Nachri shehevi darn leIsrael, similar to our Mishnah. A guy brings a gift to a Jew. Afilu dagim hamefulmin. It's obvious they're fresh-looking fish. Their bodies are still clearly new. Uperos b'nei yoman, fruit of the same day. Mutarin. That's very difficult. The whole Maseches started with Beitzah shenol d'biyamtov. We compared it to Peros HaNoshrin, about fruits and vegetables that fall off the tree on Yom Tov. Of course, that's muktzah. So we have to figure this out. According to Rav, who said that you're allowed to receive a gift and it's not muktzah, that's no problem. It's not muktzah, no problem. You can move them. You just can't eat them. According to Levi, who said that when it is allowed to eat these foods, Peros b'nei yoman mishar be'achila, you're not allowed to eat fruits that are day of on Yom Tov. That's muktzah mamish. That's absolutely not allowed. So says the Gemara, that's a ridiculous argument. If what you're saying is that peros are not edible, peros b'nei yoman mishar b'tiltul, you're not allowed to carry them either. This isn't a raya for Rav either. This is not a raya for anyone. No one should be able to move fruits that fall off a tree on Yom Tov. Ella says the Gemara, you're right. What is the case that we're dealing with in this Beitzah? The case of Nachri shehevi darn leIsrael, says the Gemara, 6 lines from the bottom, 7 lines from the bottom. It's fish that have a redness to them. This was an implication to them that they were still fresh. Upeire, they are fruits, but they're fruits that look very new because they're sitting in the moisture of other fruits and vegetables, and apparently that's helpful. Why then did the Beitzah refer to them as b'nei yoman? Shein kein b'nei yoman, because they look like they're new. So in other words, we tried to bring a raya from this Mishnah about the Nachri shehevi darn leIsrael. We were not able to bring a proof to that case because these were not. The case was not aligned with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah was dealing with fish that were given on that day, and this Beitzah was dealing with fish that were captured from before. We'll stop right here at Amar Rav Papa, and Emir Hashem pick up tomorrow. I don't know what time Daf is. It should be 45 minutes before Mincha. Wishing you all a beautiful Shabbos and a good night. Have a great day.